Hi, and welcome to Dyalog's August webinar on cross-platform charting. I'm Brian Becker, the manager of the APL Tools Group here at Dyalog, and I'm looking forward to this presentation. So first, I'd like to give an overview. What we're going to do today is we're going to examine two cross-platform charting options that are available now with Dyalog. The first is SharpPlot. Now, SharpPlot has been available since 2005, but its roots date back much earlier, I think back to the mid-80s, to a package called RainPro. It was originally developed by Adrian Smith, and in 2005 he turned it into a .NET assembly with an APL interface. And then Nick Delcroix took it over in 2014, took over the development, and he produced an APL workspace version that can run on any platform that Dyalog runs. The second option is Syncfusion's Essential JavaScript 1. And this has been available with my server since 2013. And it uses what we're calling the WC2 interface, and we'll talk a little bit more about WC2 in a bit. But basically, it will run under the HTML renderer that was introduced with Dyalog version 16, or my server. So when we talk about cross-platform, we mean that any platform where Dyalog APL runs, so that's Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and AIX. Now, cross-platform might be important to you if you develop on platforms other than Windows, or you develop on Windows and deploy on platforms elsewhere. For instance, when I work on the TryAPL My site, I develop under Windows, but I deploy it under a Linux virtual machine. If you want to distribute a product that's going to run on multiple platforms, you want to package a desktop product that'll run under Windows, on Mac OS, on Linux desktops, this could be important to you. And also, if you just want to provide an interface that runs across the net, whether it's locally on a local intranet or across the internet, cross-platform could be important. And the idea is that you'll write the code once and be able to run it anywhere. Now, when we talk about charting, we're mostly concerned with data visualization. So it could be something very simple. This is my favorite Fibonacci series generating expression. Or it could be something a bit more complex, where we have a 3D graph here with a lot of stylization and a lot of data. So one of the things you need to ask is, how is the chart that you're developing going to be used? Is it going to be interactive? Is it going to be generated dynamically based on some user input or some data that you're retrieving from somewhere? Do you want it to be animated when the graphic appears? Do you want it to animate as it appears? Also, do you want it to be responsive to user interaction? If the user hovers over a data point, do you want to drill down on that data point or display some additional information? Or in some cases, you might have a static application for your graphic or for your chart, in which case you're going to be incorporating into some sort of print or electronic publication, like a PDF file. So today's goals are to make you aware of these off-the-shelf options that are available with Dyalog, and hopefully to supply enough information that you can start exploring on your own to determine which is best for you. Now, goals that we don't have today, or non-goals for today, are to teach you the details of either of these technologies, because either could easily fill a full-day workshop. But if you're interested, please let us know that you'd like some follow-up instruction on either SharpPlot or Syncfusion, and we can do subsequent webinars or webcasts. And we're also not going to try and recommend one solution or the other for you. It really depends on your needs and your situation. So the environment that we're going to be working with today is geared toward interactive use and not static publication. And we're going to be using my server and WC2. And as I mentioned, WC2 is a Dyalog framework for generating web content, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now later this year, we're going to split out WC2 on its own, so it will provide a common framework for delivering desktop applications using HTML renderer, or applications over the net using my server. So what I'm going to be doing is we're going to develop two similar pie charts, one under Syncfusion and one under SharpPlot. We're going to start simple. We're going to build a page We're going to add a minimalist chart, and then we're going to render it, and then we'll go in and enhance it and render it again. So let's go ahead and demo the pies. This is a small my site using my server that I put up, and basically to help me navigate through this webinar. But so I'm going to display the SharpPlot simple pie chart first. And this toggle code button is something that I've added to my pages so that I can toggle between the rendered output and the APL code that generates it. So this is basically the default pie chart that you get with SharpPlot. And as you'll notice, it's labeled each of the wedges. And in this case, the data is, well, let's take a look at the code. So with my server, every page is a class. And every page has a compose method. And the compose method basically just says, this is the content that I want to show on my page. So the first thing we're doing is we're grabbing some data. And this is data that I compiled from the CIA World Factbook. And in this case, it's a two-column matrix where the first column is a country name and the second column is the population. And I reduced it from the 254 countries in the data set to the top 9 countries in terms of population, and then the last category is the rest of the world. So the next thing I'm doing is I'm adding a SharpPlot object to my page, or I'm creating a SharpPlot object using this SharpPlot new function. And then I'm setting the X labels to the country names. Now a pie chart, most charts work with X and Y coordinates, and a pie chart is a little strange because the X coordinates is actually are actually the labels that go on the wedges. So in this case, I'm setting the X labels to be on the wedges, and then I'm just saying draw the pie chart, and I'm passing it the population data. And the next thing that I'm doing is I'm adding the SharpPlot object, I'm wrapping it and adding it to my page. So this is what add SharpPlot wrapper does. And that creates a container that, in this case, I'm going to, I set the width to 800 pixels so that it fits nicely on my screen. And again, this is the rendered output. So, to generate a pie chart, there's really not much code there. Now let's contrast that with what we do to generate a simple Syncfusion pie. So here we've got, instead of annotated wedges, we've got a legend at the bottom and in a slightly different color palette. So the code to generate this pie is basically the same. Again, it's a myPage class. We have the compose function, but we're grabbing the same data. And in this case, we're adding an EJ chart, which is the widget that we have in WC2 for the Syncfusion charting object. And then again, EJ chart uses X and Y coordinates. And so I'm taking my matrix of data and I'm turning it into a JSON array with data for each of the points. The X coordinate, or the X value, is the country name, and the Y value is the population. And Syncfusion charts work with series of data, and they can work with multiple series. So every chart is going to have at least one series, and our pie chart only has one. So I'm saying for series 1, set the points object to be the points that I've just generated. And then I'm just saying that I'm setting for series 1, I'm setting the chart type to pie, and this is the result that you see. Now, if we want to enhance the look and feel of our pies, we can add a little bit of styling to it. And in this case, this is the SharpPlot enhanced pie. So I've added a title. I've added some additional information on the labels, and then as you hover over each wedge, you can see the detailed population data for the country represented by each wedge. And what did we have to do in the code to achieve these effects? Well, actually, it's not all that much more. So I wrote a little utility program called Millions to format the population figures, and I'm adding the formatted data onto the third column, or the formatted labels onto the as the third column of data. Again, I'm just creating a new SharpPlot. I'm setting the X labels now to these enhanced labels that include the country name and population. I'm setting a heading for the chart to world population, then adding up all of the data. And then I wanted to give, if you noticed in the first Syncfusion or SharpPlot chart, some of the colors were duplicated because the default palette that comes with SharpPlot has 5 colors. So you'll notice that China and Nigeria are the same, India and Bangladesh and so on. So what I did was I decided to copy the same colors that I saw in the Syncfusion chart, and so I took the RGB values for those colors, and I can easily turn that into SharpPlot colors using the I'm using the from ARGB method and setting colors to that palette. And then I'm adding a tip onto each wedge, which is the country name and the thorn of the full population. And then I've also, I don't know if you noticed, but I've spun the pie by 90 degrees. And so to do that, you just set the start angle. And then the same thing that I did before is I'm adding I'm rendering the pie chart and then adding it to the page and setting the width to 800 pixels. So now let's take a look at the Syncfusion enhanced pie chart. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that when the chart was rendering, it was animated, and if we hover over any individual segment, it pops it out and also displays a tip. Now, there's a lot of debate as to whether animating the segments of a pie chart is really a useful animation or not. I'll leave that for you to debate. But I'm trying to show you the types of animation that are possible, not necessarily that they're good. So the code that we use to generate this pie, again, it looks a lot like what we did for the SharpPlot pie. And so we have the same treatment of the data up at the top. We're adding the chart. And now instead of just X and Y, we're setting a text element for each point, which is the country name and the formatted population. Again, I'm setting the series 1 points to that data. I'm setting the chart type to pie. And now I'm setting the title text for the chart to world population. Down here I'm setting the animation. So this is the animation is the part that both renders the chart on creation, and also if I set explode to true, that's the thing that pops out the segments when you hover over them. And then I'm setting the data markers. I'm setting turning the data labels for the markers to visible. I'm enabling smart labels, which basically means that the labels will organize themselves so they don't overlap. I'm setting the label position to outside extended so that the labels will be a little bit further away from the pie. I think that looks a little bit better on the page. And then I'm setting 2 properties for the connector line. I'm setting the type and the color property to Bezier and blue. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that the notation that I'm using here, I'm always calling chart.set to set a parameter for the chart. But the notation is very similar to namespace notation in Dyalog APL. And in fact, the underlying representation for the chart options is in a namespace. Finally, I'm setting the tooltips to visible, so that turns on the tooltips. Now, if you notice in SharpPlot, I needed to set the text for the tips, to the country name and the population, whereas all I'm doing is I'm saying the tooltips are visible in Syncfusion. So I didn't actually have to set make any data or create any data and set it. Although you do have that level of control, you can change what the content of the tooltip is. And then I disabled the chart legend at the bottom, and then finally I set the angle. I rotated it around 90 degrees. And this is what you wind up with. So, now I'm going to talk a little bit more about SharpPlot, and we'll go into some details because there were a lot of functions that we were calling that, well, how did I know which ones to call? So we'll go into that, but Windows users may have an advantage when using SharpPlot because the chart wizard provides an interactive chart designer. And so the code that you can get out of the chart wizard will run on any platform, but currently it's a Windows only thing. And then also the SharpPlot engine is compiled into C# and renders some charts, especially complex charts, significantly faster. The SharpPlot will generate output in a variety of standard formats, SVG, PDF, and PostScript. And then you can take the output that SharpPlot generates, and they can be, again, used on other platforms or incorporated into documents. And so our approach for today was to generate some SVG, which can be rendered by HTML renderer locally. It can be rendered by my server on a network, or it can be saved in a file and then included in an HTML document or HTML page or some other document. So now I'm going to show you the SharpPlot chart wizard and take a look at the workspace. So SharpPlot is distributed with Dyalog APL, and it's in the form of a workspace. And if you just load it, you'll see a lot of information about how to initialize SharpPlot and then how to view some samples. And so I'm going to just take a look at one sample. So this is actually a sample that has a lot going on. It's got 3 different graphs. It's got a graph of the revenue. The invoice sales is this line here. And then you've got a third graph, which is this pie chart up here. And there's a note in the middle, and so there's a lot of custom stylization going on here. And if you were to look at the code for samples, or for this sample, you'd see that there's a fair bit going on. And so my first question is, well, how would I know what things I'm supposed to set? And what I use to generate my graphs under Windows is I use the charting wizard, which you can get using the bracket chart user command, or there's also an icon on the toolbar here that if you press it and your cursor happens to be on a variable that can be graphed, it will go ahead and do that. But here is the chart wizard, and you can click on the details, or you can click on the icon of the chart here, and then you can select from a variety of different chart types. And so if you wanted to see a pie chart of a sine wave, it's, well, not particularly interesting, a little psychedelic, I guess, but you have about a dozen tabs here that give you very fine-grained control over pretty much every aspect of the chart. So for instance, if I wanted to set a heading, if I wanted to set a heading on my chart, I can use the text tab, the heading option. And one of the nice things about this is if you right-click on any of these things that you can set, it will bring up the help, the SharpPlot help for it. And so that's integrated into Windows. But for the people who aren't using Windows, we also have SharpPlot.com, which has got the entire help system for SharpPlot on it. And here you'll see some ideas about getting started. And one of the things that you'll notice is that the SharpPlot examples are, let me go to a chart sample. You'll notice that the samples are in C#. And there's a section in the Getting Started section called SharpPlot in different languages. And so it gives you, here's what this looks like in C#, the same code in VB.NET, the same code in Dyalog APL using .NET, and the same code in Dyalog APL not using .NET. So, and this is a very complete reference. I mean, one of the parts that I really like is under SharpPlot methods. Again, if I'm not running under Windows and I don't have that, the chart wizard, I can look here and I can see all the different methods to draw different types of charts. And it gives me a thumbnail of the charts so that I'm able to find the chart that best fits the graphical representation I'm trying to create. In the SharpPlot workspace, there it was, sorry. In the SharpPlot workspace, again, you can just copy the workspace into your workspace if you're not on Windows, and the code is basically syntactically identical to if you were using .NET or not. So if you see those examples in C# and you want to translate them into APL, it's pretty straightforward. First of all, where you see it creating a new SharpPlot object, we just use quad new and then prefix it with causeway, which is the namespace that contains the SharpPlot code. And now in my server or WC2, the hooks that we have built in don't require you to create the new SharpPlot instance. You just use the SharpPlot new function. Anytime you're setting something like a string variable in C#, you just change the equals to an assignment arrow and the double quotes to single quotes. Some properties are Boolean properties and they use an OR in C# to combine values, and that just translates to plus in Dyalog APL. And calling a function is basically identical. The syntax is identical between C# and APL. And finally, if you're calling a function that takes an array, if you have a single value for the array, you need to enclose it. But if it's a nested vector, then you can just pass the array. Okay, now we'll take a look at the Syncfusion demos. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go out to the Syncfusion demo site. And here they have showcase examples of a lot of their, that use several of their widgets on a single page. But the thing we're focusing on today is the chart object. And you can see under chart, we've got examples for all different kinds of charts. And so what I did was when I was developing the material for this webinar, I went to the pie, and you'll notice we have a very familiar type of animation and familiar looking labels. And I took this code here, with each sample, they have the code that they use to generate that sample. And I looked at this, and then I basically was able to translate what I saw here into how to specify it using WC2. One of the nice things that you can do here, similar to the chart wizard in SharpPlot, is you can click edit and you can play with settings. So if I wanted to change the title from expenditures to pie is great, and I've done this every time I've run through this demo. I press enter to execute something, and it changes the edit. But so you can go in and edit things interactively, and see and see what the change is, and then you can take this code and convert it into APL. So how do we go about converting JavaScript, that JavaScript that we saw, into WC2 syntax. So we saw something that looked like here, series, marker, data label, connector line, or I guess visible and shape are the two that I'm looking at. So this is JavaScript notation, and basically anytime that you see a square bracket, that means there's an array. And anytime you see a curly brace, that's an object. And so since series is an array, I'm going to look at the first thing in series, and then I'm going to go down to marker, and then the data label object within marker, and then the visible and shape properties of the data label. So here we have series, it's an array, the marker object, the data label object, and then visible and shape properties. So that translates to the first series, the marker object, the data label object, and notice we can use stranded notation for it, like we can with namespaces in APL, visible and shape, and then we call chart.set. And then you notice here that this value true is not in quotes, which means that it's the JavaScript constant true. And to represent that rather than the string true, we use underbar true in WC2. And then the string none is the string none in APL. So when we look at the variety of charts, SharpPlot has 23 different chart types, and 3 of those are 3D. Syncfusion has 28 chart types, and 8 of those can be rendered in 3D. And then they also have 16 other data visualization controls, some of which will correspond to SharpPlot chart types. So for instance, SharpPlot has a dial, or I think they call it a dial chart type. And it basically looks kind of like a speedometer. And that's not actually a chart type in Syncfusion, but it's a separate control called circular gauge. So there are some equivalents between some other Syncfusion controls and some of the SharpPlot chart types. When we want to see what types of resources are available to us to learn SharpPlot and to explore it, again, I showed you the www.sharpplot.com. And it has tutorials and chart samples and very good reference. Again, the examples are in C#, but translating them to APL is quite straightforward. And then again, you've got this big advantage in Windows if you want to use the chart wizard, because it will show you the code. I don't know that I demonstrated that, but if you go into the chart wizard and do File and View Script, it will show you the code that's used to generate that plot. And then you can cut and paste this or copy it into your own function or create your own function from this and render that same graph. Now, also, the chart wizard is in Windows only for now. One of the projects that we are considering is producing a cross-platform HTML renderer based version of the chart wizard. With Syncfusion Resources, well, I've shown you the demos. They also have a pretty good help system. So I'm going to take a look at the help for the chart object. And you'll see here that there is a lot of detail. This is basically a user guide. And then if you scroll down to the bottom of the description for the particular control, they have an API reference which has information about every possible setting for a given chart. So again, if we look at the data markers object, we see the same type of structure that we saw in the demo and in my code, where we're setting series, marker, and some properties on that. So again, the examples in Syncfusion are in JavaScript, but I think that the translation to APL using WC2 is pretty straightforward. Now, another thing, to try and give you some help in using WC2, You can go to www.myserver.com, and I happen to have a local copy of that running here. And the MyServer MS3 sample website has information about all of the controls that are available. So if we were to say, look at the controls, and I want to filter by the Syncfusion library, I can look at EJ chart. And this will give you a description of the API that Dyalog has implemented for the chart object. And it will also display any relevant samples that happen to use EJ chart. And if you go to the sample page, you can take a look at the APL code and see what was used to generate that chart. And then on the description for the widget, if you go to it, the name of the control in the upper left-hand corner is a link to the API documentation back on the Syncfusion site. So it's hopefully fairly easy for you to navigate between. So I want to try and contrast the interactivity and layout of SharpPlot and Syncfusion. And SharpPlot can be interactive. You can click on data points and do drill down operations or display additional information for that point. But it's not really animated in the same way that Syncfusion is. You have extensive layout control, and I can't emphasize this so much. There are things that you can do with SharpPlot that I haven't seen any other graphics package being capable of. So it's also a part of Dyalog, so there's nothing to download. It's a workspace, and if you're on Windows, the DLLs are shipped with Dyalog. So there's nothing additional that you have to acquire or download or install to use SharpPlot. And again, you can run it standalone. It doesn't require any additional framework for you to generate output for publication or for embedding in a website if you wanted to run something under, say, IIS or Apache. Now, Syncfusion has got some built-in interactivity on many other charts. They have themed styling, which means that the color scheme that was displayed by default, you can select different themes and color schemes, and then we'll change the look and feel of all of the Syncfusion controls. They'll use a common theme. Syncfusion also has localization, so that if you're trying to ship an international product or deliver a service that's going to be used in different locations, it will alter number and date formats and names of months and days of week to match the locale. And the layout control is good in Syncfusion, but it doesn't match the capabilities of SharpPlot. And again, the Syncfusion is a part of MyServer and WC2, so you would need to download that from our GitHub repository. So, in conclusion, both SharpPlot and Syncfusion are capable of producing a wide variety of high-quality, highly customizable charts. And you can do animation and interaction with the user with both. And I wanted to show that with SharpPlot. I just discovered this because I previously I'd been unable to get it to work, but I found a sample in the SharpPlot workspace. And here is some animation as the chart is being rendered. And you can see that it's using, it's got actually quite a bit of animation. But if I look at the code, it's adding a lot of animate elements to the page, which have a fairly reasonable syntax, but right now it's a lot of coding of HTML style content to achieve that animation. The other thing I wanted to show was some of the interactivity that's available So this is a bubble chart that's one of the samples on the My site, on the MS3 My site. And when you hover over any individual bubble, it will display information about that particular country. This is health per capita health care spending. So the United States is way out here, so SharpPlot is really good. It was originally designed. I mean, RainPro was originally designed for print or publication media, so it doesn't, and it still excels at that. It doesn't need a web server framework, and it's a good choice if you need really fine control over the layout of your charts. Syncfusion is good if you're developing web dashboards or applications. But the nice thing is it's not an either-or choice. You can use both. So I want to say thank you for attending. If you have suggestions for follow-up sessions, either on SharpPlot or Syncfusion or anything else, feel free to email me. I'm brian@dyalog.com. And are there any questions? There are no questions. All right. Well, in that case, our next webinar is going to be September 20th, and Adam Brzezinski is going to be doing a presentation on Jupyter Notebooks. And there won't be a webinar in October because we will be preparing and then in Belfast for Dyalog 18. Now, some of those presentations at Dyalog 18 will be streamed live, and video recordings of most of the presentations will be available online in the weeks following the conference or user meeting. So, thank you very much.